A young woman escaped a cult and sought refuge in the quiet chapel of a grieving pastor, but something about her arrival didn't feel real. Behind her bruises stood a group that twisted faith into control, stripping victims of hope in the name of salvation. But fate had its own plan. Laura's final visit became a test not just of faith, but of the soul itself. And what happened that night changed everything. Just wait until you hear the haunting turn this story takes, and how justice, in its quiet way, found the light again. Pastor Elijah Cross didn't believe in coincidences, not after everything he'd lived through. Once a man with a full life and a warm home, he'd lost his wife 5 years ago, and with her, the part of himself that believed in ease and comfort. Since then, he'd poured himself into service, not out of duty, but survival. In Red Hollow, a quiet little town wrapped in moss and memory, he had become a constant. Every evening, without fail, Elijah would unlock the church doors, read from the scriptures beneath flickering light, hand out warm meals to those who had no names left in the world, and then sit in silence, listening to the hearts of strangers confess in whispers. It wasn't peace, but it was enough. Until that night. The wind had changed. Thick clouds rolled over the bayou like ink spilled across the sky. The air pressed down, heavy and wet, not with rain, but with something else. Something that made Elijah stop and listen, though the world around him was silent. He turned the final key in the church door, and then he saw her. Across the street, sitting motionless on the steps of the old shelter, was a young woman. Rain clung to her like shadow. She was soaked to the bone, shivering, her lip cut, dark marks beneath her eyes. Not crying, not calling for help, just waiting. He crossed the road without a word. She looked up, eyes too tired for someone so young. 22, she would tell him later, but right then she only said one thing, barely louder than the wind. Please, just let me stay the night. I'll be gone by morning. I promise. He didn't ask her name, not yet. He just opened the church annex, handed her a blanket, dry clothes, and showed her to the small spare room behind the choir hall. Her name, when it came, was Laura. She didn't offer a last name, didn't say where she'd come from, didn't explain the bruises. He didn't press her. There was a time for questions. This wasn't it, but something lingered as she turned to go. A look in her eyes. Not fear, not relief, certainty. It didn't belong on someone who looked so lost. Elijah closed the door behind her, turned the key, and told himself he'd done the right thing. But long into the night, as the storm tore at the chapel windows and the wind moaned like something old and grieving, he could not sleep. The storm had passed hours ago, but the night still felt unsettled. A loud bang, wood against wood, or maybe a shudder in the wind, snapped him awake. He sat up, heart beating harder than the sound itself. Then came the creak, not from outside, from inside the house. Bare feet on the old wooden floor, too light to be anything but hers. He reached for the lamp, but didn't turn it on. Something about the dark felt necessary. She stood there in his doorway, not in her own clothes. A nightgown, silky. Not hers, too loose, too old-fashioned. Someone else's. "I'm scared," Laura said, Her voice wasn't shaking, but her hands were. One clutched the fabric at her collar, the other hung at her side, fingers twitching like they wanted to reach for something or someone. Their eyes locked in silence longer than it should have lasted. He rose, led her back to the guest room, saying nothing, but she wouldn't let go of his hand. They walked like two shadows through the hallway, past photos that hadn't been dusted in months, past the door he never opened anymore. She sat on the edge of the bed, still holding his hand. "You're a good man, Pastor," she whispered. His throat went dry. "I try to be." She looked at him, not like a child, not like a woman, but like something else entirely. "Then, why am I not afraid of you?" He had no answer. The silence filled the room like water. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just trembled, lightly, like a candle wick right before it goes out. Then, slowly, she whispered the words that would burn into his mind forever. "Please, don't undo my buttons." That's what stopped him, not the words, the way she said them, not scared, not confused, but inviting. Surrendered. His hand, he hadn't even realized it had moved, froze midair, and from behind him, without warning, came a voice he hadn't heard in years. Soft, stern, sacred. "You made a vow. To me. To him." His heart stopped. It was her voice. His wife. Gone 3 winters now. But that voice was not gone. Not tonight. He stepped back like he'd touched fire. Laura didn't speak, didn't move. He closed the door, slowly, carefully, as if sealing away a storm. Then he walked, barefoot, cold floor, down the stairs, past the photos, past the memories, into the chapel. He didn't light a candle, didn't open his Bible, just fell to his knees and prayed until the morning light cracked the stained glass and the first bird dared to sing. By morning, Laura was gone. Her blanket was folded neatly on the edge of the bed. The nightgown she'd worn was draped over the chair, and on the pillow, lying soft and still, was her old shirt, worn, faded, almost childlike in its simplicity. Tucked beneath it, a note, 4 words scribbled in faint ink. "Thank you for still being human." Elijah stood there in silence for a long time. The room felt colder than it had the night before. He didn't touch anything. He just closed the door and walked away. A week passed. He didn't mention her to the congregation, didn't speak of the night, or the voice, or the prayer that had carried him through until dawn. Some things, he believed, were not meant for sermons. Until Sunday. Service had just ended. The last hymn still echoed faintly from the walls when a police officer entered the church. Dust from the gravel road clung to his boots. There was something heavy in his eyes, like he didn't want to say what he'd come to say. "We found a body in the woods," the officer said. "A young woman. Elijah's breath caught in his chest. She'd been trying to escape from a group out west of here, called themselves the Clean Path, a so-called spiritual retreat, but in truth, it was a place no one should have been. They manipulated people, isolated them, especially the women, convinced them they needed to be purified. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. She tried to run. Someone didn't want her to make it. She was wounded on the way into town. He looked at the ground, then back up. Her name was Laura West. Based on the condition of the body, she died about a week ago. The church fell silent. Elijah's mouth opened, but no sound came. The color drained from his face. His fingers gripped the edge of the pew. That's not possible," he finally whispered. "I saw her. She was here. I gave her shelter. I prayed with her." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe someone who looked like her." But Elijah didn't answer, because he knew. The air in the church seemed to shift, not colder, not darker, just still, like the world was waiting for him to admit something out loud. His hands trembled. His voice, when it came, was small, honest, wrecked. "I nearly broke my vow with a soul that had already crossed over." The church remained closed for 6 days. No sermons, no confessions, no hymns. Just silence, the kind that settles in the soul when you've seen something you can't explain and felt something you can't ignore. But on the 7th night, the doors opened. The pews filled slowly, some curious, some loyal, some unsure why they came, only that they needed to. Pastor Elijah stood at the front, beneath the cross. No robe, no notes, just him. And for the first time in years, he let the truth come out. "I'm not a saint," he said. "I'm a man, and I almost let desire defeat faith." A stillness followed, not shock, not judgment, just stillness. A few people got up and left. No words, no anger, just quiet exits through the back. But others stayed. Some lowered their heads, some stared at the floor. One or two closed their eyes and listened harder. And then, the sound of wheels on the old wooden aisle. An elderly man came forward in a wheelchair. His hands were worn from time, his eyes from grief. "My name is John Harris," he said. "Laura was my daughter." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small folded photo, creased at the edges from being opened too many times. "She used to pray in this church," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "She'd sit in the 3rd pew, swinging her legs, thinking no one noticed." A pause, a breath. "She ran away because I was weak. I let her down. I wasn't there when she needed strength." He looked up at Elijah, not in anger, but in something deeper. "But if she came here in her final night, then she still believed." The pastor's composure broke. Tears welled in his eyes, not from shame this time, but from something gentler. He didn't know what Laura had truly been. A spirit, a dream, a test sent from beyond or within. But one thing he was sure of. He had resisted. In the moment where weakness begged to be fed, he chose not to run from it, but to face it. And that's what saved him. Not perfection, not pride, but the simple act of staying human, when it would have been easier not to. And in that moment, quiet, unremarkable, unseen by the world, a kind of light bloomed inside him, not the kind that blinds, but the kind that heals.